On a winter evening in New York in 1930, a formal dinner is held in a townhouse where servants move precisely and quietly between tables. Guests speak in careful tones, aware of reputation and proximity. One place setting remains untouched. It belongs to Huguette Clark. No one is surprised that she does not arrive. The hosts offer a mild explanation. She is unwell, she prefers privacy, and the evening proceeds without her, as many of her evenings did. At the time, Huguette is already known, though rarely seen. She is young, wealthy, and spoken about more than spoken to. Invitations continue to be sent. Apologies continue to be accepted. Her absence becomes a social fact rather than an exception, noted briefly and then folded into routine. This pattern does not begin with scandal or conflict. It begins with avoidance, letters unanswered, appearances postponed, decisions deferred. While others of her class move through public life, marriages, charities, society columns, Huguette's life narrows instead, quietly and deliberately. The money surrounding her is immense, inherited and unquestioned. But the spaces she occupies grow smaller. Rooms become preferred over crowds, familiar staff over peers, silence over explanation. Nothing outwardly dramatic marks this moment. No rupture, no public fall. Only a gradual withdrawal that those around her learn not to challenge. This is where the story starts, not with excess, but with disappearance, and with a young woman already choosing not to be seen, long before anyone asked why. Huguette Clark is born in 1906, but from the beginning, her life is shaped less by presence than by absence. Her father, William Andrews Clark, is already a public figure by the time she arrives. A self-made copper magnate, U.S. Senator, and one of the wealthiest men in the country. His life unfolds in offices, railcars, boardrooms, and political chambers. Huguette's unfolds elsewhere, largely out of view. Her early years are spent moving between large residences staffed by nurses, governesses, and servants. The houses are orderly and quiet. Meals arrive on schedule. Lessons are planned. But her father is often not there. When he is, his appearances are formal and brief. He is decades older, deliberate in his movements, careful with his words. Their relationship is polite, structured, and distant. Affection is implied through provision rather than touch or time. Huguette's mother, Anna LaChapelle, maintains a strict household rhythm. She manages the staff, oversees education, and controls access. Emotional expression is restrained. Privacy is treated as virtue. The child learns early that attention is something one waits for, not something one requests. As a girl, Huguette shows talent in drawing and painting. Her sketches are neat, detailed, careful. Teachers note her discipline rather than her enthusiasm. When praised, she responds with silence. When corrected, she complies without protest. Nothing about her behavior draws concern. Nothing draws particular notice either. In photographs from childhood, she appears composed, almost formal, even at an age when looseness is expected. She stands slightly apart from others. Her posture is careful. Her gaze rarely meets the camera directly. The images circulate quietly within the family, never widely shared. Her father's wealth ensures every opportunity. Tutors are hired. Travel is arranged. When she studies art, it is with private instructors rather than academies filled with peers. Exposure is controlled. Risk is minimized. The outside world remains something observed through intermediaries. By her teenage years, Huguette understands the rules of her environment. Silence is safer than visibility. Compliance is rewarded with calm. Questions complicate matters. Emotional needs are not discussed openly. They are addressed through structure. A new lesson, a new routine, a new room. William Clark's health begins to decline as Huguette grows older. When he is ill, the household becomes even more guarded. Doctors come and go. Conversations lower in volume. The family closes in on itself. Huguette watches from the margins, learning how illness reorganizes power and attention. In 1925, when she is 19, her father dies. The event is public. Newspapers recount his fortune, his career, his influence. For Huguette, the moment passes without spectacle. There are no recorded outbursts, no scenes of grief witnessed by outsiders. She remains with her mother, surrounded by staff trained to maintain composure. The inheritance is immense. She becomes one of the wealthiest young women in the country overnight. Legal arrangements are formalized quickly. Trustees, lawyers, and advisors step in. Decisions are discussed around her more than with her. She listens. She agrees. The machinery of wealth engages, efficient and impersonal. The loss of her father does not create freedom. It creates expectation. Her position in society is now fixed. She is an heiress. That role comes with assumptions: marriage, visibility, participation, invitations increase, attention sharpens. Yet her habits do not change. She continues to spend most of her time at home. When she does appear in public, it is briefly and with visible restraint. She dresses elegantly, but conservatively. She speaks little. Observers describe her as shy, delicate, reserved. No one presses further. Her mother remains a constant presence, shaping daily life through routine and caution. The household retains its distance from the outside world. Relationships are filtered. Access is managed. Huguette's circle remains small, professional, controlled. When she begins to receive marriage proposals, they are handled discreetly. Meetings are arranged under supervision. Expectations are clear. Marriage is presented as a logical step, not an emotional one. Huguette listens, considers, and delays. There is no rebellion, no dramatic refusal, only postponement. Decisions take time. Silence stretches. Suitors drift away without confrontation. Art becomes a deeper focus. She spends long hours painting alone. Her subjects are still contained by interiors, flowers, controlled compositions. There are no crowds, no motion, no public scenes. The act is private, repetitive, absorbing. Letters written during this period are brief and polite. She thanks people. She apologizes for absences. She offers little else. Nothing in them signals distress. Nothing signals joy either. As the 1920s progress, society changes rapidly around her. Parties grow louder. Public life accelerates. But Huguette's life does not follow that rhythm. Her world remains insulated, deliberate, slow. When she does attend social events, she leaves early. When photographed, she turns slightly away. She declines interviews. Her name appears in print less frequently than expected for someone of her status. By her mid-20s, her pattern is established. She is present only when necessary. She avoids explanation. Others begin to accommodate this quietly. Invitations include allowances. Absences are anticipated. No single event drives this withdrawal. There is no recorded trauma, no public humiliation, no decisive break. Instead, there is continuity. A childhood shaped by distance evolving into an adulthood structured around avoidance. The wealth that surrounds her does not disrupt this pattern. It reinforces it. Money ensures that withdrawal carries no immediate cost. Needs are met without negotiation. Privacy can be purchased and maintained indefinitely. In the early 1930s, Huguette Clark is still young enough for her absences to be excused as temperament. Society pages note her name sporadically, often attached to events she does not attend. Unable to be present becomes a familiar phrase. The tone is forgiving. She is described as delicate, artistic, reserved. These labels settle around her and soften curiosity. Her mother continues to act as intermediary. Invitations are screened. Responses are drafted carefully. When Huguette does appear in public, it is usually for brief, controlled occasions: a charity visit arranged in advance, a formal dinner with familiar hosts, a private viewing at a gallery. She arrives late, leaves early, and speaks only when addressed directly. During one such appearance at an art-related gathering, witnesses later recall her standing slightly apart from the group, observing rather than participating. She listens closely, nods politely, and offers a short remark when prompted. Nothing she says is memorable. What lingers is her restraint. She does not compete for attention. She does not challenge anyone. She does not assert preference. This behavior is not accidental. It is practiced. Over time, Huguette learns that quiet compliance prevents scrutiny. Silence keeps expectations vague. When she does not speak, others fill the space for her, explaining her temperament, defending her privacy, lowering demands. Marriage proposals continue to surface, now handled more cautiously. Meetings are formal and chaperoned. Conversations are polite and brief. Suitors describe her as pleasant but distant. There is no conflict, no clear rejection, just an absence of momentum. After a few encounters, interest fades. Rather than provoking confrontation, Huguette would allow situations to dissolve on their own. This becomes her primary method of control. She does not refuse, she delays, she does not argue, she withdraws. Outcomes occur without her having to claim responsibility for them. Her art remains her most consistent activity. She paints daily, often alone for hours. When instructors comment on her work, she accepts feedback quietly and adjusts without discussion. She avoids group classes. Studios are private. Materials are delivered to her home. The act of creation stays contained within familiar walls. Photographers occasionally request sittings. These requests are declined gently. When portraits are commissioned, they are rarely displayed publicly. She permits her image to exist, but not to circulate. Visibility is tightly regulated. At social functions she does attend, she positions herself near exits or along walls. She keeps her voice low. She responds with courtesy, but rarely elaboration. People learn not to push. Conversation shifts away from her naturally. This suits her. By her late 20s, this pattern has become self-reinforcing. Because she speaks little, fewer questions are asked. Because she is rarely seen, her absence attracts less attention. Silence becomes both shield and habit. Her mother's influence remains strong. Decisions are discussed privately, often framed in terms of caution. Public life is presented as demanding, exhausting, potentially harmful. Retreat is safer. Routine is protective. Huguette absorbs this logic without resistance. When friends from earlier years drift away, there is no recorded effort to maintain those ties. Letters go unanswered. Visits are postponed indefinitely. Relationships fade quietly, without explanation or repair. The broader world continues to change, economic uncertainty, social shifts, rising tension, but Huguette's daily life remains insulated. Wealth buffers her from consequence. Staff handle logistics. Lawyers manage correspondence. She is rarely required to confront discomfort directly. What emerges during this period is not dramatic withdrawal, but refinement. She learns how to exist on the margins without being challenged. She learns how to let others decide for her, while retaining the comfort of non-involvement. Silence becomes a way to remain untouched. By the end of the decade, Huguette is no longer simply shy. She is practiced in absence. The choice not to engage has become instinctive. And because it costs her nothing materially, there is no immediate reason to change. As the expectations placed upon her quietly loosen, something else tightens. A dependence on routine, control, and withdrawal that will shape every decision that follows. By the mid-1930s, Huguette Clark is widely described as beautiful. The word appears repeatedly in private correspondence, society columns, and the quiet remarks of those who encounter her briefly. It is spoken with a tone of certainty, as though her appearance is an established fact rather than an experience. And yet, very few people can say they have seen her for more than a moment. Portrait painters request sittings. Photographers inquire discreetly. Journalists float the possibility of profiles that would frame her as a modern heiress, cultured, refined, artistic. Each request is handled the same way. Responses are polite. Appreciation is expressed. Nothing is scheduled. When portraits are made, they are controlled affairs. She sits in private studios, often with only the artist and a trusted attendant present. The sessions are brief. Conversation is minimal. The resulting works are kept within her personal spaces, not exhibited, not circulated. Her likeness exists, but only where she can decide who sees it. During this period, she begins to refuse even informal photography. Guests are asked not to bring cameras. Events are selected based on predictability rather than importance. When she does attend, she positions herself deliberately, at the edge of a room, near familiar faces, never at the center of attention. Accounts from those few who speak about her later describe the same pattern. She listens intently, rarely interrupts, and offers short responses that do not invite follow-up. Compliments make her visibly uncomfortable. When praised, she lowers her gaze or redirects the conversation. She does not contradict the assessment, but she does not engage with it either. Her mother remains vigilant. Appearance is managed carefully. Clothing is elegant but restrained. Jewelry is minimal for someone of her means. Nothing is chosen to provoke comment. Every detail works toward neutrality. At a time when wealthy women are expected to host, perform, and represent family status publicly, Huguette does none of this. She does not preside over salons. She does not cultivate a recognizable public identity. She is present just enough to fulfill obligations, absent enough to remain undefined. This restraint becomes especially noticeable as her peers marry and begin visible domestic lives. Engagement announcements fill newspapers. Society weddings become social events. Huguette attends some ceremonies briefly, arriving late and leaving before receptions conclude. She is polite, distant, and unreachable. Her own marriage, when it comes, arrives quietly. In 1930, she marries William Gower, a former Princeton football player and airline executive. The union appears appropriate on paper, respectable, discreet, socially acceptable. There is no grand celebration, no society spectacle. The wedding is small, controlled, and efficient. Almost immediately, the limitations of the arrangement become apparent. The marriage does not create a shared life. They do not establish a vibrant household. Appearances are minimal. Travel together is rare. Social interaction as a couple is limited and strained. Accounts suggest Huguette is uncomfortable with the expectations of married life, shared routines, social obligations, physical presence. Gower, accustomed to activity and public engagement, finds her reserve difficult to navigate. Communication remains polite but distant. Within a year, the marriage dissolves. The separation is handled quietly, without scandal or public explanation. There are no accusations, no dramatic legal battles. The divorce is finalized efficiently. Huguette returns to her previous pattern of life almost immediately. The marriage leaves no visible trace, no children, no enduring partnership, no social transformation. It functions less as a life event than as an experiment concluded without comment. After the divorce, her withdrawal deepens. Invitations decline sharply. Her appearances become rarer. The brief period in which she might have been expected to assume a public role as a wife closes without replacement. What remains is routine. She devotes herself to painting, often working alone for entire days. She prefers subjects that are static, interiors, still lifes, controlled landscapes. There are no crowds, no motion, no narrative scenes. The paintings are careful, precise, and contained. Art instructors note her discipline. She repeats techniques until they are perfected. She avoids experimentation that would require exposure or critique. Finished works are stored rather than displayed. Meanwhile, the estates associated with her family remain largely unused. Large rooms are maintained meticulously but rarely occupied. Staff move through spaces designed for social gatherings that never occur. Furniture is preserved. Curtains are drawn. Time accumulates without disturbance. Her wealth continues to grow through investments managed by others. She does not involve herself deeply in financial decisions. Meetings with advisors are brief and formal. She listens, she approves, she rarely questions. The distance between her public identity and her lived experience widens. To outsiders, she is an heiress of enormous means. To those within her orbit, she is increasingly absent, present physically at times, but withdrawn in engagement. Doctors begin to appear more frequently in her life, initially for minor concerns. She follows medical advice carefully. Appointments are scheduled regularly. Hospitals and clinics become familiar environments, structured, quiet, predictable. Unlike social spaces, medical spaces require little performance. Expectations are clear, roles are defined, interaction is limited and professional. Over time, she appears more comfortable there than anywhere else. As years pass, her avoidance of visibility becomes expectation rather than anomaly. People stop asking why she is not present. They adjust plans accordingly. Her absence no longer disrupts social order. It has been absorbed. Beauty for Huguette becomes something observed from the outside, a quality attributed to her, discussed around her, but never integrated into her sense of self. It brings attention she does not seek and obligations she does not want. So she distances herself from it, from cameras, from mirrors held up by others, from roles that require being seen. By the late 1930s, the pattern is no longer tentative. It is settled. Huguette Clark has learned that invisibility is not a failure in her world. It is an option. And with every year she chooses it, returning becomes harder. By the time Huguette Clark marries William Gower in 1930, the decision carries little visible emotion. There is no long courtship recorded in letters, no anticipation documented by friends, no celebration planned to mark the transition. The marriage appears less as a personal desire than as a procedural step, something expected to happen eventually, and now resolved. The ceremony itself is restrained. It is small, orderly, and quickly concluded. The guest list is limited. There is no effort to turn the occasion into a social event. Photographs are scarce. Public notice is minimal. For someone of her wealth and status, the quietness is notable. Gower is respectable, active, socially functional. He moves comfortably through professional and public environments. On paper, he satisfies the expectations attached to Huguette's position. The match reassures observers that she will now enter a conventional adult role. What the marriage does not do is alter her behavior. Soon after the wedding, it becomes apparent that they do not establish a shared rhythm. They do not host gatherings together. They do not travel as a couple in any sustained way. There are no reports of a home animated by guests, routines, or joint plans. The structure of her life remains largely unchanged. Huguette continues to spend long periods alone, painting, reading, and maintaining the same private habits she held before marriage. Gower's professional life pulls him outward. Their days diverge rather than align. When they appear together in public, the encounters are brief and formal. Observers later describe a lack of ease between them. No visible conflict, but no warmth either. Conversation is polite. Physical proximity is limited. They behave more like acquaintances fulfilling obligation than partners building intimacy. The marriage places new expectations on Huguette, expectations she does not actively resist but does not meet either. A married woman of her standing is expected to host, to represent, to engage. She does none of these things. Invitations are declined. Events are postponed. Explanations are vague. Rather than confronting these gaps, both parties seem to allow them to persist. There is no public attempt to correct course, no announcement of new plans. The marriage simply fails to generate a life. Within months, the distance becomes unsustainable. Gower's outward-facing existence contrasts sharply with Huguette's inward retreat. The mismatch does not erupt into scandal. It dissolves quietly. By 1931, the marriage is effectively over. The divorce proceedings are handled efficiently and discreetly. There are no accusations aired publicly, no testimonies offered, no explanations provided. The separation is framed as mutual and unremarkable. Huguette emerges from the marriage without visible damage to her reputation, but also without any sense of expansion. The experience does not lead to greater independence or clarity. It confirms what her earlier habits already suggested, that shared life requires a level of exposure she does not tolerate. After the divorce, she retreats further. Invitations that once arrived occasionally now arrive rarely. Her appearances drop sharply. Friends and acquaintances adjust quickly. She is not someone to insist upon. The marriage, brief as it was, leaves an imprint, not through drama, but through reinforcement. It demonstrates that even within the most conventional framework available to her, she remains unable or unwilling to engage fully. The institution that might have drawn her outward instead pushes her inward. There is no attempt to remarry. No rumors of romantic involvement follow. Suitors disappear entirely. The subject becomes quietly closed. Her days settle into repetition. She paints, she reads, she interacts with staff and advisors. The outside world is filtered through intermediaries. Lawyers handle correspondence, assistants schedule appointments. Human interaction becomes functional rather than relational. During this period, her health becomes a recurring focus. Minor ailments are addressed promptly. Physicians are consulted frequently. Medical advice is followed meticulously. Appointments provide structure and justification for withdrawal. Illness, even when mild, offers a socially acceptable explanation for absence. Hospitals and clinics are calm, predictable environments. They demand little emotional exchange. Interactions are professional, scripted, and bounded. Huguette appears increasingly comfortable within them. As the years pass, she begins to spend more time in medical settings than in her own homes. Initially, these stays are temporary. Gradually, they lengthen. The distinction between treatment and residence begins to blur. At the same time, her properties remain maintained but unoccupied. Staff continue their routines in rooms rarely entered. Furniture is preserved. Artifacts are cataloged. Life does not unfold within these spaces. They wait. Financially, nothing changes. Her wealth continues to grow. Investments perform. Accounts expand. None of this alters her daily existence. Money solves logistical problems but does not generate engagement. The brief marriage becomes a footnote in her life, mentioned rarely and never revisited. There are no reflections recorded, no lessons articulated. It is as though the event confirms something she already knows, and then is set aside. By the end of the 1930s, Huguette Clark is no longer seen as a young woman finding her place. She is regarded as someone apart, wealthy, private, unreachable. Expectations adjust accordingly. The experiment of marriage has concluded without upheaval, but also without transformation. It does not open a new chapter so much as seal the direction already chosen. What remains is a narrowing path, one where relationships are avoided, routines tighten, and absence becomes not a response to circumstances, but a permanent condition. The next decisions she makes will not be framed as withdrawals. They will be framed as choices of comfort, care, and safety, and their consequences will be far more lasting. By the early 1940s, Huguette Clark's life has contracted into a small number of predictable spaces. The divorce has passed without consequence, and with it any remaining expectation that she might return to public life. What follows is not a sudden disappearance, but a methodical narrowing, of movement, of contact, of obligation. Her days begin to resemble one another closely. She wakes at consistent hours. Meals are taken alone or with a trusted attendant. Painting occupies long stretches of time, always in the same rooms, with the same materials arranged carefully before her. When a routine works, she does not alter it. Social invitations continue to arrive less frequently now, and when they do, they are declined with standard phrasing. Health is cited, fatigue, a desire for quiet. No one presses for detail. Her reputation for privacy has become fixed. The houses she occupies during this period are large, but her presence within them is limited to a handful of rooms. Entire floors remain unused. Curtains stay drawn. Rooms meant for entertaining are preserved rather than lived in. Staff members move quietly through these spaces, maintaining them without inhabiting them. She interacts with employees politely but briefly. Conversations are functional. Requests are specific and controlled. Emotional exchange is minimal. Familiarity does not develop beyond routine. Medical appointments become more frequent. At first, they are scheduled in response to minor complaints. Fatigue, digestive discomfort, vague pains that never fully resolve. Doctors find nothing alarming. Recommendations are conservative. Rest is advised. Huguette follows instructions carefully. Over time, medical settings begin to replace domestic ones as her preferred environment. Clinics and hospitals offer structure without expectation. Days are planned. Interactions are defined by roles. Personal history is irrelevant. She does not have to explain herself. During longer stays, she brings familiar objects, art supplies, books, small personal items, arranging them carefully around her bed. The room becomes hers through repetition rather than ownership. Staff members note her quiet compliance. She follows schedules precisely. She rarely complains. When asked how she feels, she answers briefly. Nothing about her behavior suggests urgency or distress. She appears comfortable remaining. What begins as extended visits gradually becomes long-term residence. She returns to her homes less often. When she does, the stays are short. Medical care becomes a constant rather than a response. Her mother's death during this period removes the last central figure in her personal life. The loss occurs without public mourning. Arrangements are handled privately. The household adjusts. Huguette's routines continue uninterrupted. With her mother gone, there is no longer even the expectation of familial engagement. Decision-making becomes almost entirely delegated. Lawyers, accountants, and medical professionals take on increasing authority. She approves recommendations but rarely initiates action. Her art practice persists. She paints in hospital rooms now, adapting to the constraints of space. The subjects remain controlled and contained. Flowers, interiors, carefully framed stillness. Nothing demands interaction with the outside world. During these years, she begins to refuse nearly all visitors. Friends from earlier decades are no longer admitted. Correspondence dwindles. Letters go unanswered or are responded to by intermediaries. The few people allowed regular access are caregivers and doctors. Relationships form within these boundaries, defined by dependency and routine rather than mutuality. Trust is placed in roles, not individuals. Her wealth enables this arrangement effortlessly. Private rooms, extended stays, personal staff assigned exclusively to her. Nothing about the setup is provisional. It is maintained indefinitely. At a time when the world outside is marked by upheaval, war, economic change, public anxiety, Huguette's daily life remains unchanged. News reaches her filtered and delayed. Events do not alter her behavior. She does not comment publicly. She does not participate privately. Her properties remain untouched. Some are visited briefly to ensure maintenance. Others are never entered at all. Furniture remains wrapped. Objects are catalogued. Time accumulates without imprint. The longer she remains within controlled environments, the less adaptable she becomes. Small changes to routine cause visible discomfort. New faces take time to be tolerated. Alterations to schedule are resisted gently but firmly. She does not articulate fear. She does not speak of anxiety. Instead, she maintains that she prefers quiet, that she feels better where she is, that she does not require anything else. Doctors note her insistence on remaining hospitalized even when no medical necessity exists. They do not challenge it strongly. Her compliance, her wealth, and her lack of complaint make resistance unnecessary. What emerges is a life sustained entirely by structure. A freedom, once available, is gradually abandoned in favor of predictability. Choices narrow, options recede. There is no visible crisis driving this retreat, no single diagnosis, no dramatic episode, only accumulation of habit, of avoidance, of dependence. The world adapts to her absence. She becomes an administrative presence rather than a social one. Decisions are made in her name. Funds are allocated. Properties are managed. She remains informed but detached. By the end of this period, Huguette Clark's life is no longer oriented outward at all. It is maintained rather than lived. The routines she has chosen protect her from discomfort, but they also eliminate unpredictability, intimacy, and change. She has built a life in which nothing demands her presence and nothing invites it either. The retreat into private rooms has become complete. What comes next will not involve further withdrawal. It will involve the consequences of having withdrawn for too long. By the time Huguette Clark reaches her 40s, the scale of her wealth has long ceased to register as an event. It is not something she anticipates or reacts to. It exists as a background condition, constant and unquestioned. Income arrives, accounts grow, properties remain in her name. None of it alters the structure of her days. The machinery surrounding her fortune operates efficiently. Trustees manage investments. Lawyers draft documents. Accountants prepare reports. These professionals meet with her periodically, often in medical rooms or quiet private spaces, presenting summaries rather than options. She listens, nods, and gives approval with minimal discussion. Rarely does she ask for clarification. Decisions are framed narrowly, and she accepts them as presented. Her inheritance has provided absolute insulation from necessity. There is no requirement to negotiate, to compromise, to engage. Needs are anticipated. Discomfort is preempted. The absence of pressure becomes its own condition, one that removes urgency from choice and consequence alike. During these years, she continues to reside primarily in hospitals and private medical facilities, even when no acute condition requires it. Doctors recommend discharge. She declines gently. Arrangements are made for extended stays. Rooms are adapted to her preferences. The distinction between patient and resident erodes further. She begins to form long-term relationships with specific medical staff. Nurses rotate, but certain doctors remain constant. Trust develops, though it is asymmetrical. They manage her schedule, her medications, her daily rhythms. She complies. Authority rests comfortably with them. Her contact with the outside world narrows further. News of distant events reaches her filtered through conversation or print. She does not seek it out. When major world events occur, political shifts, cultural changes, they leave no visible mark on her routine. Her properties, meanwhile, continue to age without use. In California, in New York, and Europe, houses remain fully staffed and meticulously maintained. Heating systems are serviced, roofs repaired, gardens tended, rooms are dusted weekly. Furniture remains wrapped or carefully preserved. She visits some of these properties briefly, often under medical supervision. The visits are short and highly controlled. She moves through familiar rooms, sits briefly, then returns to care facilities. The houses are not homes, they are holdings. During this period, her philanthropy increases in volume, but not in visibility. Donations are made quietly, often anonymously. Funds are directed to institutions rather than individuals. Hospitals receive support, cultural organizations benefit, libraries acquire materials. These gifts do not bring her into contact with beneficiaries. There are no ceremonies, no speeches, no visits. The giving is transactional and distant, handled through intermediaries. Gratitude is acknowledged through letters she rarely reads herself. Her art continues uninterrupted. She paints in hospital rooms, setting up easels beside beds, adjusting to confined spaces with practiced ease. The work remains precise and controlled. Finished paintings are cataloged and stored. Few are shown. Fewer still are discussed. As years pass, her physical health begins to decline in subtle ways. Mobility decreases. Fatigue becomes more pronounced. Medical care intensifies, but her emotional posture does not change. She does not express fear or frustration. She accepts limitations without protest. The dependency on caregivers deepens. Daily tasks are handled entirely by others. Decisions that once required her approval now arrive pre-approved. She signs documents, she authorizes payments, she consents to arrangements already made. This gradual relinquishment is not framed as loss. It is framed as convenience. Her isolation is now complete. There are no friends who visit regularly. No family members remain. The people closest to her are those paid to be there. Relationships are stable, but conditional. Roles define interaction. At this stage, her wealth no longer offers possibility. It offers maintenance. It sustains the environment she has chosen, but it does not expand it. Money preserves her routines rather than opening alternatives. She does not attempt to change course. There are no recorded efforts to reconnect with society, to re-enter public life, or to reshape her circumstances. The absence of struggle becomes conspicuous. Legal structures increasingly replace personal trust. Documents proliferate. Powers of attorney are drafted. Estate planning begins early and is revised often. Control is exercised through paperwork rather than presence. When conflicts arise, disagreements over care, over management, they are resolved through legal channels. Lawyers intervene. Arrangements are adjusted. Huguette remains insulated from direct confrontation. As she ages, the consequences of earlier choices begin to surface quietly. The withdrawal that once felt protective now leaves her entirely dependent on systems she does not control personally. The silence that once shielded her now isolates her completely. Yet even now, there is no outward sign of regret. She does not articulate dissatisfaction. She does not seek change. She continues to choose what is familiar, predictable, and contained. The inheritance that once held the potential to shape a life instead becomes a force of stasis. It freezes her circumstances in place. It ensures that nothing compels her outward, not necessity, not ambition, not relationship. By the end of this chapter of her life, Huguette Clark possesses everything required to act and nothing that requires her to. The result is a life sustained indefinitely without direction. The choices she made earlier, to withdraw, to defer, to avoid, now shape her world completely. And the longer they persist, the fewer alternatives remain. What follows will not be about accumulation, but about cost, the slow emergence of consequences that wealth cannot soften or prevent. By the late 1950s, the question of where Huguette Clark lives has a simple answer, though it would have sounded improbable decades earlier. She lives in hospitals, not temporarily, not in response to crisis. She lives there by preference, returning to private medical rooms even when her homes remain available, staffed, and ready. The arrangement begins without announcement. A stay is extended. Discharge is postponed. Another facility is chosen for a second opinion, then a third. Over time, the movement between hospitals becomes routine. while movement back into her own properties grows increasingly rare. Doctors note that her conditions do not require constant hospitalization. She is stable, she is lucid, she is physically capable of residing elsewhere with support. Recommendations are made gently, they are declined politely. Huguette explains that she feels safer under medical supervision, that it is easier, that she does not want to burden anyone. These statements are accepted at face value. No one insists otherwise. Private rooms are arranged to her specifications, furniture is brought in. Personal linens replace standard ones. Art supplies are delivered and set up with care. The rooms begin to resemble small apartments more than clinical spaces. Nurses learn her preferences. Schedules adapt around her habits. She becomes a familiar presence. Staff rotate, but she remains. New nurses are briefed. New doctors review long histories. Her file grows thick with notes documenting stability rather than treatment. The homes she owns, meanwhile, sit unchanged. In New York, her apartments remain fully furnished and unoccupied. In California, estates are maintained by full-time staff. Gardens are trimmed. Repairs are made promptly. The cost is substantial, but it does not register as a concern. When she does visit a property, the stays are brief and often uncomfortable. The scale of the rooms overwhelms her. The silence feels different there. Less controlled, less purposeful. After a short time, she requests return to medical care. The hospital offers boundaries she no longer finds elsewhere. There are clear roles, clear authority, clear routines. She does not need to decide when to eat, when to rest, when to receive visitors. Everything is scheduled. More importantly, hospitals ask nothing of her socially. No hosting, no appearances, no explanations. Her presence is justified by her status as a patient, even when treatment is minimal. Over time, this justification becomes essential. Visitors are restricted. Friends from earlier years are told she is resting. Appointments are deferred indefinitely. Even professional contacts are filtered through staff. She rarely speaks on the phone. Letters are screened. Access is managed carefully. The result is a life with constant human presence and almost no personal relationship. Nurses speak to her daily. Doctors consult regularly. Yet none of these interactions require reciprocity. Care flows in one direction. Her dependence increases, but quietly. Tasks she once performed herself are delegated. Mobility decreases gradually. Each accommodation feels reasonable in isolation. Together, they produce near total reliance. During these years, she continues to give money away generously, particularly to hospitals. Donations arrive without ceremony. Wings are funded. Equipment is purchased. The institutions that house her benefit directly from her presence. This arrangement raises no immediate concern. She is not coerced. She signs documents willingly. She expresses satisfaction. Oversight exists, but it is procedural. Yet the longer she remains, the more difficult departure becomes. Hospital life reshapes her expectations. The outside world grows unfamiliar. Independence becomes abstract. When medical professionals suggest alternatives, private nursing at home, assisted living arrangements, she declines them all. Hospitals, she insists, are where she belongs. As decades pass, this choice solidifies. Younger staff members are surprised to learn how long she has been there. Older ones accept it as normal. She becomes part of the institution's rhythm. Her art continues. She paints in bed when necessary. Easels are adjusted. Canvases shrink to fit the space. The work remains methodical and contained. Finished paintings are cataloged and removed quietly. She rarely asks about the fate of her work. Storage is handled by others. Decisions about preservation are made without her involvement. Her physical world contracts further. Rooms become smaller. Equipment increases. Monitoring intensifies. Still, she does not express dissatisfaction. She does not ask to leave. By now, she has spent more time in hospitals than in her own homes. The balance has tipped so gradually that no single moment marks the change. The choice to remain under care reshapes her legal arrangements as well. Powers of attorney are updated. Medical proxies are formalized. Decisions increasingly flow through institutional channels. Trust shifts away from personal connection and towards systems. Forms replace conversations. Policies replace discretion. This structure feels secure. It protects her from unpredictability, from intrusion, from having to navigate relationships without defined roles. But it also erases the possibility of spontaneous human connection. Everyone who enters her room does so professionally. Every interaction has a purpose, a boundary, an endpoint. As she ages further, memory of life outside hospitals fades. Her homes become stories rather than lived spaces. The idea of returning to them seems impractical, even unnecessary. She does not speak of regret. She does not reflect publicly on her choices. The absence of commentary becomes itself a pattern. The decision to live in hospitals is framed consistently as practical, reasonable, and voluntary, and in many ways it is. Yet it carries consequences that accumulate silently. By choosing constant care, she relinquishes autonomy piece by piece. By accepting protection, she forfeits exposure. By prioritizing safety, she eliminates risk, and with it, change. As this chapter closes, Huguette Clark is fully embedded within institutions designed for treatment, not life. Her wealth has made this possible. Her habits have made it permanent. The next stage of her story will reveal how this dependence, once chosen freely, begins to shape not only her daily existence, but the control others hold over it, and over what will remain when she is gone. By the time Huguette Clark enters her 70s, the structures surrounding her life are no longer informal or incidental. They are fixed. Medical staff, legal representatives, and financial managers now form the core of her human environment. Each relationship is defined by role, authority, and access. None is defined by mutual history. Her days unfold according to schedules designed by others. Medications are administered at set times. Meals arrive on trays placed carefully within reach. Physical therapy is suggested, sometimes declined, sometimes accepted briefly, and then abandoned. Adjustments are made quietly. Nothing is forced. Doctors speak on her behalf more often than she speaks for herself. When questions arise about her preferences, they answer from familiarity rather than consultation. She rarely contradicts them. Their presence has become synonymous with safety. This reliance is gradual enough to appear benign. Each decision seems reasonable. Each delegation reduces effort. Each accommodation spares discomfort. Over time, the accumulation reshapes authority. She signs documents regularly, often presented at her bedside. Legal papers are explained succinctly. She listens, asks few questions, and signs. The process is efficient. The tone is respectful. The outcome is control transferred incrementally away from her direct involvement. As her physical strength declines, the threshold for intervention lowers. Caregivers adjust her position, manage her movements, anticipate needs. These actions are necessary. They are also constant. Personal space dissolves under routine. Despite this, Huguette does not appear distressed. She remains polite, calm, compliant. She thanks nurses. She expresses appreciation to doctors. She follows instructions. The absence of resistance is interpreted as consent. Her social world has now narrowed entirely to those with professional access. Friends from earlier decades are no longer in contact. There are no casual visitors, no spontaneous conversations. Entry into her life requires authorization. This authorization rests increasingly with those who manage her care. Some caregivers become long-term fixtures. Trust develops through repetition rather than disclosure. They know her habits, her preferences, her moods. She depends on them for comfort and continuity. Yet these relationships are unbalanced. Care flows one way, decision-making flows the other. Affection, when present, is expressed through attention rather than equality. During this period, concerns begin to surface quietly among external observers. Why does she remain hospitalized when alternatives exist? Why are visits so restricted? Why are legal arrangements changing so frequently? These questions are addressed through documentation. Doctors affirm her preferences. Lawyers confirm her capacity. Everything appears in order. Her philanthropy continues, directed primarily toward the institutions that house her. Donations fund improvements, equipment, expansions. Her presence becomes beneficial beyond patient status. Hospitals have no incentive to challenge her choice to stay. This mutual reinforcement goes unexamined. Her homes remain untouched. Some have not been entered by her in decades. Staff continue maintenance. Inventories are updated. Objects are preserved as though awaiting return. She does not ask about these properties. When mentioned, she acknowledges them distantly as abstractions rather than spaces. As her vision declines, she adapts without complaint. Art becomes more difficult. Painting slows. Eventually, it stops. The easel remains unused. Supplies are stored. The transition occurs without ceremony. With fewer personal activities, her days become even more dependent on care routines. Television plays softly. Books are read aloud. Silence fills the remaining hours. Medical authority now extends beyond health into logistics. Decisions about visitors, correspondence, and scheduling pass through doctors and administrators. Access tightens further. When legal disputes arise, questions about finances, about caregivers' roles, they are handled externally. Huguette is informed after resolutions are reached. She accepts outcomes without protest. The longer this structure persists, the less visible her own agency becomes. Choices are still made in her name, but rarely by her initiative. From the outside, the arrangement appears orderly and humane. She is well cared for. She is protected. She is not neglected. What is less visible is the cost of this protection. Every safeguard reduces exposure. Every intervention narrows autonomy. Every barrier to access isolates her further. She does not articulate this cost. She does not frame her situation as confinement. She insists she is content. Her statements are recorded and accepted. Yet the life she now lives bears little resemblance to the one she inherited. Vast resources exist around her, but they are managed beyond her reach. People surround her, but none know her outside defined roles. Dependence, once a choice, has become a condition. Care, once supportive, now shapes the boundaries of her world. As this chapter closes, Huguette Clark remains physically present, mentally intact, and materially secure. Yet her life is almost entirely mediated through systems designed to act on her behalf. The silence that once served as refuge now leaves no room for negotiation, and the structures meant to protect her have quietly become the only structures she knows. As Huguette Clark enters her 80s, the outward signs of her life suggest generosity. Money continues to move steadily from her accounts into institutions across the country. Hospitals receive large sums. Cultural organizations benefit. Libraries and universities acknowledge gifts that arrive quietly, often without ceremony or public attribution. From the outside, the pattern looks consistent and benevolent. Inside her daily life, it functions differently. The decisions behind these donations rarely originate with her alone. Proposals are brought to her by lawyers, advisors, and medical administrators. The language used is practical: tax efficiency, institutional need, long-term benefit. She listens carefully, she approves, she rarely initiates. When she does express preference, it is usually for causes that do not require her presence. Institutions, not individuals. Buildings, not programs. Endowments, not ongoing relationships. The structure mirrors her broader habits. Involvement without contact. Hospitals receive the most sustained support. Wings are renovated. Equipment is purchased. Programs are expanded. In some cases, the facilities housing her benefit directly from her contributions. This arrangement is not hidden, but it is not examined closely either. She does not attend dedications. She does not meet beneficiaries. Gratitude is conveyed through letters addressed to intermediaries. Plaques, when installed, often omit her name at her request. Recognition remains controlled. Her philanthropy allows her to act without appearing, to contribute without engaging, to be present only through paperwork. This distance becomes more pronounced as her health declines. Mobility decreases further. Vision fades. Energy diminishes. Her days are structured almost entirely around care routines. Decisions arrive already shaped. When representatives from recipient institutions request visits or meetings, the requests are declined politely. Health concerns are cited. Schedules are full. Alternatives are offered: letters, reports, photographs. She accepts these in place of human contact. The result is generosity without relationship. During this period, the scale of her giving increases, even as her personal world shrinks. The contrast goes largely unnoticed. Money flows outward while her life narrows inward. Her art practice has now ceased entirely. The paintings she created over decades remain stored, cataloged, and unseen. Decisions about their future are discussed by others. She listens, but offers little direction. The work, like much of her life, exists without audience. Legal documents proliferate. Trusts are amended. Wills are revised. Each revision is explained as precautionary. Each adjustment shifts control incrementally. She signs carefully, trusting the explanations provided. She does not contest these changes. She does not seek independent counsel beyond those already involved. The circle of authority remains tight. As her dependence deepens, so does the narrative surrounding her contentment. Doctors note her calm demeanor. Lawyers affirm her capacity. Caregivers describe her as agreeable. These assessments circulate whenever questions arise. The question of whether she is isolated by choice or circumstance becomes increasingly difficult to separate from the systems that benefit from her arrangement. At one point, concerns surface about access. Why are visits so restricted? Why are longtime acquaintances unable to see her? The answers are consistent: her health, her preference for quiet, her desire not to be disturbed. Documentation supports these claims. Statements attributed to her confirm satisfaction. No intervention follows. Her homes remain untouched. Entire decades pass without her entering rooms she owns. Staff continue maintenance without expectation of return. The properties become preserved environments rather than living spaces. In conversations about legacy, philanthropy becomes the central theme offered by those around her. She is described as generous, private, devoted to institutions. The narrative is simple and reassuring. What it omits is absence. She does not mentor. She does not guide. She does not participate. The giving does not generate connection or continuity. It produces structures, not relationships. Even within hospitals, her donations do not alter her status. She remains a patient, managed, and scheduled. The power dynamics do not shift in her favor. If anything, they reinforce existing arrangements. As her physical world contracts further, the legal one expands. Safeguards multiply. Oversight increases. Each measure is justified as protection. Together they create a system in which deviation becomes nearly impossible. She no longer controls who enters her room. She no longer decides when correspondence reaches her. These decisions are filtered through others, often without her explicit awareness. Yet she does not protest. Silence remains her default. The philanthropy continues until near the end of her life, consistent and unexamined. It becomes the primary evidence offered to explain her choices. A life of giving, it is said, conducted quietly. But the quiet is not incidental. It is essential. It allows generosity without exposure. It permits action without engagement. It sustains the illusion of participation without the burden of presence. As this chapter closes, Huguette Clark is still alive, still wealthy, still surrounded by systems designed to care for her and act on her behalf. Her name appears on documents, on endowments, on financial statements. But her voice does not. The money moves, the institutions grow, and the distance between what she gives and how she lives becomes complete. A separation so stable that no one inside it feels compelled to disturb it. By the time Huguette Clark reaches her 90s, the contrast between what she owns and how she lives has become extreme. Entire properties remain in her name. Apartments overlooking Central Park, a vast estate in California, residences furnished decades earlier and kept in immaculate condition. Yet she has not lived in any of them for years. Some she has not entered for decades. The upkeep continues regardless. Staff are retained. Security systems are maintained. Utilities run. Climate controls preserve furniture, paintings, fabrics. Inventories are updated regularly. The houses age, but carefully. In New York, her apartments remain exactly as she left them. Furniture sits under protective coverings. Closets hold clothing untouched for generations. Bathrooms sparkle unused. Refrigerators are empty but operational. Time passes without leaving marks. These spaces are not abandoned. They are preserved. The cost of this preservation is immense. Staff salaries, maintenance contracts, taxes, insurance, all paid automatically. The financial burden never becomes a question because the money never becomes scarce. There is no forcing function that would require a decision. No one suggests selling. No one asks whether the houses serve a purpose. Their continued existence is treated as neutral fact. Huguette is occasionally informed of repairs, renovations, or inspections. She listens, acknowledges, and authorizes payment. The details do not appear to register emotionally. The properties exist on paper more than in memory. When asked whether she would like to return to one of her homes, she declines calmly. Hospitals, she says, are more convenient, safer, easier. The logic is accepted. Outside these empty homes, the world continues to move. Economic downturns occur. Housing shortages worsen. Entire neighborhoods change. None of this reaches her as a moral question. Her wealth shields her from proximity to consequence. The staff who maintain these properties rarely see her. Some never have. Their work is continuous, invisible, and unacknowledged. They preserve spaces meant for a life that no longer happens. This arrangement does not trouble her publicly. She does not express guilt. She does not frame it as waste. It is simply how things are. Meanwhile, she remains confined to increasingly smaller medical rooms. Beds replace chairs, equipment crowds walls, personal objects diminish. The scale of her lived space shrinks as the scale of her owned space remains vast. Her caregivers manage her environment carefully. Lighting is adjusted, noise is controlled, temperature is monitored, comfort is prioritized. The world is reduced to what fits within reach. At the same time, legal disputes begin to surface quietly around the periphery of her life. Questions arise about access, about decision-making authority, about whether her preferences are fully represented. These concerns do not reach her directly. Lawyers intervene. Courts are consulted. Documentation is produced. The systems around her absorb the conflict. She remains insulated. Her dependence on caregivers deepens further. Some individuals gain increasing control over her schedule, her correspondence, her visitors. Trust is assumed to be justified by proximity and longevity. Oversight exists, but it is procedural rather than relational. During this period, investigations will later reveal that certain individuals close to her benefited financially from their roles. Payments were made, gifts were given, arrangements were approved. At the time, these transactions are framed as reasonable compensation. She signs off on them without objection. The pattern repeats. A proposal is brought, an explanation is offered. She consents. The consequences unfold elsewhere. Her philanthropy continues alongside this, reinforcing the image of generosity. Yet the giving remains abstract. It does not alter the conditions of those closest to her daily life, nor does it create accountability for those managing her affairs. When she is informed of global events, wars, disasters, economic crises, she listens quietly. She does not comment publicly. She does not alter her spending. Her wealth remains static relative to her experience. This is not indifference in the dramatic sense. It is distance. The moral blind spots in her life do not announce themselves. They accumulate quietly. Excess exists alongside scarcity, but never in the same frame. Labor sustains her holdings, but never enters her room. Wealth circulates, but never confronts need directly. Her isolation ensures that contradictions remain invisible. As she ages further, questions about her capacity arise more frequently. Doctors attest to her lucidity. Lawyers affirm her competence. Statements attributed to her emphasize contentment and preference. These assurances satisfy formal requirements. They also prevent intervention. The homes remain unused. The money remains active. The life remains contained. When she finally does speak about her properties, it is in abstract terms. She refers to them as assets, responsibilities, things to be managed. There is no language of attachment, no nostalgia, no desire. They are part of the system, not part of herself. By the end of this stage, Huguette Clark exists in a paradox of scale that no one around her seems willing to address directly. She occupies one room while owning dozens. She lives under constant care while funding entire institutions. She is physically constrained while financially limitless. None of this produces visible conflict. The systems function, the arrangements persist, the silence holds. The cost of this arrangement is not measured in money. It is measured in absence, of use, of connection, of consequence. And as her life approaches its final years, the structures built to maintain comfort and control will begin to reveal what they were designed to protect. and what they were never meant to preserve. By the early 2000s, isolation is no longer something Huguette Clark actively maintains. It no longer requires decision or effort. It has settled into place, reinforced by years of repetition and accommodation. What once felt protective now feels inevitable. Her world is quiet, regulated, and narrow. Days pass with little variation. Care routines structure time. Meals arrive at predictable hours. Medications are administered without discussion. Conversations are brief and functional. Nothing intrudes unexpectedly. When she wakes, she does not consider plans. There are none to consider. Her environment has been shaped to remove choice wherever possible. Lighting adjusts automatically. Temperature is set. Noise is minimized. The room asks nothing of her. Visitors are rare. Most requests for access are denied before they reach her. Health concerns are cited. Fatigue is mentioned. She is said to prefer rest. These explanations are consistent enough to become unquestioned. She does not object to this filtering. In fact, she appears relieved by it. Decisions about who enters her life have been outsourced completely. The responsibility of refusal no longer rests with her. Over time, even familiar names fade. Friends from earlier decades have either died or drifted so far away that re-entry seems impractical. There are no attempts to reconnect, no letters written to bridge the distance. The silence has lasted too long. Her voice weakens physically as well. Speech becomes softer. Conversations shorten further. When asked open-ended questions, she answers minimally. She does not elaborate. She does not reminisce. Memory remains intact, but it is rarely exercised publicly. The past is not revisited unless prompted, and even then details remain sparse. Events are recalled without emotion. People are mentioned without narrative. Her caregivers learn not to press. The isolation is now mutually reinforcing. Because she speaks little, fewer questions are asked. Because fewer questions are asked, she speaks even less. The loop tightens without friction. At this stage, her dependency has become complete. She cannot move freely without assistance. She cannot manage correspondence independently. She cannot leave the facility without coordinated planning. Each limitation feels justified. Together, they eliminate autonomy. Legal authority has consolidated around a small number of individuals. They manage finances, oversee care, and control access. Their decisions shape her remaining life, often without her direct involvement. When disputes arise, over management, over compensation, over authority, they occur outside her presence. Court filings, negotiations, and settlements happen beyond her room. She is informed after resolutions are reached, if at all. Her role in these processes is symbolic rather than active. She signs when asked. She confirms when prompted. The machinery moves regardless. The institutions around her continue to benefit from her presence. Hospitals receive ongoing support. Staff positions are justified. Facilities expand. Her continued residence is normalized. No one within these systems is incentivized to disrupt the arrangement. It is stable. It is funded. It is orderly. Her homes remain untouched. By now, entire generations of staff have come and gone without ever seeing her there. The properties have become artifacts, preserved environments detached from their owner. Occasionally, she is shown photographs of these places. She acknowledges them politely. There is no visible reaction. The images do not seem to evoke longing or recognition. They might as well belong to someone else. The isolation has also reshaped how she is spoken about. In professional circles, she is described as reclusive, private, content. These descriptors circulate as explanation, requiring no further inquiry. The word choice is often used. She chooses this. She prefers quiet. She does not want visitors. Whether this remains true in any meaningful sense becomes increasingly difficult to assess. Preference, after decades of reinforcement, has merged with habit. Alternatives no longer feel real. There is no space in her life where contrast could reintroduce desire. She has not been outside institutional care in years. She has not navigated public space in decades. The outside world exists only abstractly. As her physical condition declines further, even small changes cause visible discomfort. New staff members take time to be tolerated. Schedule changes produce anxiety. Stability becomes essential. This rigidity is treated as fragility rather than consequence. Adjustments are made to preserve calm. The environment tightens further. Her philanthropy continues, but now it is almost entirely automatic. Funds are released according to prearranged plans. Decisions are executed by others. Her involvement is reduced to formal consent. She does not ask how the money is used. Reports are summarized briefly. The details do not seem to matter. The gap between her material impact and her lived experience has never been wider. Entire institutions operate in her name, yet her personal world consists of a bed, a room, and a handful of rotating caregivers. She is not distressed by this disparity, or at least, she does not express distress. Silence remains the dominant feature of her inner life as presented to others. Doctors continue to affirm her mental competence. She answers orientation questions correctly. She understands explanations. She appears calm. These assessments satisfy legal thresholds. They do not address quality of life. As she approaches the final decade of her life, the isolation has hardened into something beyond preference. It is no longer merely a way of coping. It is the only way she knows how to exist. The structures built to support her now define her entirely. There is no part of her life untouched by mediation, no moment unfiltered by procedure. What began as withdrawal has become erasure, not dramatic, not forced, but complete. And as this chapter closes, the silence that surrounds Huguette Clark is no longer something she actively maintains. It is simply the air she breathes. The next decisions made in her name will not be about comfort or care. They will be about control and about what happens when a life structured entirely around avoidance can no longer avoid scrutiny. By the time Huguette Clark reaches her mid-90s, nearly every aspect of her life is governed by documents, forms, authorizations, powers of attorney, medical directives, trust amendments. Layers of paper now stand where relationships once might have. The system functions smoothly, but it no longer requires her participation in any meaningful sense. Meetings about her affairs no longer take place in rooms she occupies. They occur elsewhere. Law offices, hospital administration spaces, courtrooms. Outcomes are delivered to her in summary form. She is asked to approve, not to deliberate. Her signature remains valuable. It validates decisions already shaped by others. The circle of authority around her is small and stable. Certain lawyers appear repeatedly in documents. Certain caregivers gain expanded roles. Familiar names recur across financial, medical, and legal domains. Over time, these roles overlap. Boundaries blur. This consolidation is justified as efficiency. It reduces confusion. It minimizes disruption. It ensures continuity. No one frames it as exclusion. Access to Huguette becomes formalized. Visits require approval. Phone calls are scheduled. Letters are screened. The process is explained as protection. She is elderly. She tires easily. She prefers quiet. Those who question the arrangement are met with documentation. Medical opinions affirm her wishes. Legal filings confirm her competence. The system defends itself through procedure. Her voice, when cited, appears only in fragments. Short statements recorded by others, affirming satisfaction, expressing preference for privacy. These declarations circulate widely in legal contexts, though few people hear her speak them directly. Over time, even these statements become unnecessary. Precedent replaces testimony. It is known what she wants. It has been established. Her properties, now almost entirely symbolic, are discussed in estate planning sessions. Their future is debated abstractly. Preservation, donation, sale. She is informed of options after discussions conclude. She expresses no strong preference. Decisions default to institutional outcomes. Museums, foundations, endowments, structures that can receive wealth without requiring relationship. The logic is consistent with her life. Institutions do not ask questions. They do not require presence. They endure. As her health declines further, concerns about influence begin to surface more sharply. Are her decisions truly independent? Are those closest to her acting in her best interest? These questions are raised quietly, often by individuals who no longer have access to her. Investigations follow. Courts review arrangements. Testimony is gathered from caregivers, doctors, and lawyers. Each insists that Huguette is lucid, informed, and content. Medical evaluations confirm cognitive function. Legal standards are met. The system holds. What is not examined is the absence of alternatives. She is competent, yes, but she has no unmediated contact with the world. Every option presented to her comes through the same channels. Choice exists within narrow bounds. She does not request independent counsel. She does not seek second opinions outside the existing circle. She does not ask to speak privately with outsiders. Silence persists. When a court finally orders greater access to her, limited, supervised, the experience is brief and controlled. Visitors note her frailty, her quiet demeanor, her reluctance to engage. She does not express distress. She does not complain. The encounter resolves nothing. Soon after, access tightens again. The system adjusts. Documentation expands. Oversight becomes more formal, not more personal. Her life is now entirely procedural. Care is scheduled. Finances are managed. Legacy is planned. Everything operates according to rule. There is no space for spontaneity, no mechanism for rupture, no moment where she must confront contradiction directly. The legal structures surrounding her do not exist to harm her. They exist to manage complexity. Over time, they also replace trust, not because trust failed, but because trust was never cultivated. Relationships that might have complicated matters were never formed. Questions that might have challenged routine were never asked. Silence smoothed the way. As her condition worsens, even her limited participation fades. She sleeps more, speaks less, signs fewer documents. Authority shifts further outward, yet her name remains central. It authorizes. It legitimizes. It holds weight even as her presence diminishes. In these final years, Huguette Clark is protected by systems that no longer require her consent in any meaningful way. The mechanisms are legal, medical, and administrative. They are thorough. They are orderly. They are also impersonal. What remains of her life is not lived experience, but record. A trail of documents describing a woman who prefers privacy, who is content with care, who wishes to be left alone. Whether this description still reflects a living person becomes impossible to determine. The structures around her have outlasted the need to ask. As this chapter closes, the transition is complete. Human trust, fragile, uncertain, demanding, has been fully replaced by formal authority. The life that once narrowed through avoidance is now sealed by process. What follows will not concern comfort or care. It will concern conflict, not within her life, but around it, as the systems built to protect silence are forced to contend with exposure, dispute, and the final question of what remains when the subject herself can no longer speak. By the late 2000s, the systems surrounding Huguette Clark begin to strain under their own weight. What had functioned quietly for decades, legal authority consolidated among a small circle, access tightly managed, decisions justified by routine, now attracts attention from outside forces that procedure alone cannot deflect. The first signs appear not as accusations, but as questions. Why has one of the wealthiest women in America lived almost exclusively in hospitals for decades? Why are longtime acquaintances unable to see her? Why do the same few names appear repeatedly across medical, legal, and financial documents? These questions do not originate from journalists or courts at first. They come from distant relatives, former associates, and professionals who encounter fragments of her situation and find them difficult to reconcile. When inquiries are made, the responses are consistent. Huguette prefers privacy. Her health is fragile. She is content where she is. Documentation supports every claim. Still, pressure builds. In 2010, formal legal action is initiated by individuals seeking clarity and access. The case does not allege abuse outright. Instead, it challenges the opacity of her arrangements. The request is narrow: independent evaluation, limited visitation, confirmation that her wishes are being respected. For the first time in decades, the structures around Huguette face external review. Court filings reveal the extent of her isolation. They document years spent in medical facilities without medical necessity. They outline the degree of control exercised by caregivers and attorneys. They list financial transfers approved in her name. None of this is hidden. All of it is technically lawful, but placed side by side, it raises unease. The court orders evaluations. Doctors examine her cognitive capacity. Independent medical professionals assess her mental state. Each concludes the same thing. Huguette is lucid. She understands questions. She answers accurately. She is legally competent. These findings reinforce the existing system, yet they do not resolve the deeper concern. Not whether she can decide, but whether she has meaningful opportunity to do so. During this period, she is briefly allowed to receive visitors not previously approved by her caregivers. The encounters are awkward, brief, and emotionally flat. She does not express distress. She does not articulate dissatisfaction. She does not ask for change. Observers describe her as gentle, distant, and tired. The visits end. Access tightens again. Behind the scenes, disputes intensify. Lawyers argue over authority. Caregivers defend their roles. Financial arrangements are scrutinized. Payments made to those closest to her are examined in detail. Each transaction has justification, compensation for care. Gifts approved willingly, services rendered. Nothing is conclusively improper, yet the accumulation unsettles. For Huguette herself, these conflicts barely register. She is informed selectively. Summaries are brief. Reassurances are constant. She continues to express satisfaction with her situation. Her daily life does not change. Meals arrive. Medications are administered. Silence resumes. The legal conflict, however, reshapes how her life will end. Under court supervision, some controls are loosened, additional oversight is imposed, certain individuals are removed from positions of authority, others remain. The system adjusts rather than collapses. In this process, Huguette becomes more visible than she has been in decades, not as a person, but as a subject of dispute. Her name appears in court documents. Media coverage begins, cautious but persistent. Articles describe her as a reclusive heiress, a mystery, an enigma. They focus on the strangeness of her life rather than its progression. The coverage is restrained, but curiosity grows. She does not respond publicly. She does not correct narratives. She does not engage. In the hospital room where she spends her final months, these developments are distant echoes. She watches television occasionally. She listens when spoken to. She sleeps for long periods. Her physical condition declines steadily. Weakness increases. Appetite fades. Medical intervention intensifies, then eases. The end approaches without drama. Legal arrangements accelerate. Final revisions to her will are executed. Institutions are named as beneficiaries. Properties are allocated. Foundations are designated. Again, the pattern holds. Institutions, not individuals. Structures, not relationships. She signs where asked. She confirms when prompted. In 2011, Huguette Clark dies at the age of 104. Her death is quiet. No public ceremony follows. No large gathering. The event is recorded formally and then absorbed into the legal machinery already in motion. What follows is anything but quiet. Her estate, valued in the hundreds of millions, becomes the subject of extended litigation. Relatives contest provisions. Institutions defend bequests. Caregivers' roles are re-examined. Years of isolation are parsed retroactively. Each side presents documentation. Each cites her expressed wishes. Each claims legitimacy. The question underlying every dispute is simple and unanswerable. Was this life chosen freely or shaped by habit and control until alternatives disappeared? There is no single moment to point to, no decisive abuse, no dramatic coercion, only accumulation. Of routines, of authority, of silence. The courts eventually settle the estate. Money moves where documents direct it. Properties change hands. Foundations receive funds. What cannot be redistributed is clarity. As this chapter closes, Huguette Clark has become more visible in death than she ever was in life. Her name circulates widely now, attached to questions rather than presence. The disputes over control reveal not a crime, but a vacuum. A life so thoroughly mediated that no one can say where preference ended and structure began. What remains to be examined is not the legality of her choices, but their meaning, and the irony of a legacy built entirely to preserve silence, now exposed to permanent scrutiny. The final chapter will not resolve this tension. It will only leave it where it belongs, unresolved, unsettled, and quietly disturbing. Huguette Clark's death in May 2011 does not arrive as a rupture. It is the final step in a long process of narrowing that has already removed nearly everything recognizable as a public life. She dies in the same hospital environment she has chosen for decades, attended by medical staff accustomed to her quiet compliance. There is no gathering at her bedside, no final statements recorded for posterity, no attempt to frame her life in her own words. The official notices are brief. Age 104, cause natural. The facts are unremarkable. What follows is not. Within days, the legal machinery surrounding her estate accelerates. Documents drafted years earlier are activated. Trusts are triggered. Notifications are sent to institutions named as beneficiaries. The scale of the fortune becomes visible in a way it never was during her life. Estimates circulate quickly. Hundreds of millions of dollars, multiple properties, art collections, jewelry, assets dispersed across jurisdictions. The numbers dominate early reporting because they are easy to measure. Her life is harder to summarize. Relatives emerge, distant, some unknown to the public until now, questioning arrangements that left them with little or nothing. They speak not only about money, but about access, about years without contact, about unanswered letters and denied visits. Their claims are cautious but pointed. Institutions named in her will respond with documentation. They cite signed agreements, statements of intent, records affirming her capacity and preferences. Everything is in order. Everything is legal. Caregivers and advisors defend their roles. They describe devotion, routine, protection. They emphasize her expressed desire for privacy. They recount a woman who did not want visitors, who disliked disruption, who preferred the calm of institutional care. Each account is internally consistent. Together, they do not align. Court proceedings stretch on, depositions are taken, medical records are reviewed. Financial transactions are traced, payments made to caregivers over the years are scrutinized. Some appear generous, others appear excessive. All were approved. Again, there is no single act that resolves the question, no definitive proof of exploitation, no clear violation that allows the story to settle into accusation. Instead, what emerges is a portrait of a life that drifted so far into mediation that intent becomes impossible to locate precisely. Journalists begin to revisit her past, searching for anchors. They describe her childhood, her brief marriage, her long withdrawal. They focus on the strangeness of her hospital residency, the untouched mansions, the empty rooms maintained for decades. The coverage is restrained, but the tone shifts. What was once framed as privacy now appears as disappearance. What was once called preference now reads as avoidance hardened into permanence. Still, no one can say when the line was crossed, or if it ever was. Her properties, once sealed, are opened. Staff enter rooms untouched since the mid-20th century. Furniture remains exactly where it was placed. Clothing hangs unworn. Personal items sit as they were left. The spaces feel less like homes than time capsules. Photographs of these interiors circulate. They become visual shorthand for her life. Wealth frozen in place, preserved without use. The images provoke fascination, then discomfort. The contrast is stark. A woman who lived her final decades in a single room owned dozens she never entered. The art she created over a lifetime is cataloged. Many works are discovered unseen. They are careful, controlled, quiet. Critics note the absence of people, the stillness of scenes, the lack of narrative. The paintings reflect nothing overtly dramatic. They reveal restraint rather than confession. Her jewelry and personal effects are appraised. Some items are valuable beyond expectation. Others are modest. None carry stories attached to them. Ownership is documented. Use is not. As the estate proceedings continue, the question of agency resurfaces repeatedly. Doctors reaffirm her mental clarity. Lawyers reiterate her expressed wishes. Yet those wishes are always cited secondhand. recorded by the same systems under scrutiny. There is no diary to consult, no private letters revealing doubt or longing, no late-life reversal recorded. The silence that defined her life persists into death. Court settlements eventually resolve the distribution of her estate. Some funds are redirected, certain claims are acknowledged, others are dismissed. The legal process concludes as it must, through compromise and documentation. What it cannot conclude is meaning. In public memory, Huguette Clark becomes an object of curiosity rather than understanding. She is described as an heiress who vanished, a woman who chose hospitals over homes, a fortune without a life attached to it. Each description captures part of the truth. None capture the whole. The narrative resists simplification. She is not clearly victim or architect. She is not heroic or tragic in conventional terms. Her life contains no dramatic fall, no visible rebellion, no climactic rupture. Instead, it ends as it was lived, quietly, mediated, and unresolved. Those who managed her care insist she was content. Those who sought access insist she was isolated. Both positions can be supported by evidence. Neither can be proven conclusively. What remains undeniable is consequence. The choices she made early to withdraw, to defer, to avoid, shaped an environment in which alternatives slowly disappeared. By the time questions arose, there was no clear path back, not because she was prevented from leaving, but because leaving no longer belonged to her sense of what was possible. Her death forces attention onto this trajectory, not because it reveals wrongdoing, but because it exposes the fragility of agency when habit replaces decision. In life, her silence was accommodated. In death, it becomes the central problem. There is no final testimony to interpret. No clear intent to honor, only records, structures, and competing interpretations. As the last documents are filed and the estate is closed, Huguette Clark recedes once again, this time into history rather than hospitals. What remains is not an answer, but a question left deliberately open. At what point does protection become confinement and preference become disappearance? The story does not resolve it. It cannot. It only leaves behind the evidence of a life in which wealth ensured comfort, but never restored connection, and in which silence, once chosen freely, ultimately spoke louder than anything she ever said. After the court filings quiet and the last distributions are finalized, what remains of Huguette Clark's life exists almost entirely on paper. Ledgers close, trusts dissolve, properties change hands, institutions absorb the funds assigned to them. The machinery that surrounded her for decades completes its final task and moves on. What does not resolve is the meaning of what has been transferred. The homes she owned, once sealed and preserved, are gradually open to the public eye. Real estate listings appear, auction houses catalog contents, curators walk through rooms untouched for half a century. Reporters describe dust-free furniture, wrapped chairs, unused kitchens, closets filled with clothing that never aged on a body. These spaces provoke fascination precisely because they were never lived in. They look staged, but they are not. They look abandoned, but they were continuously maintained. They reveal wealth not as indulgence, but as suspension. New owners renovate. Walls are repainted. Layouts are modernized. The houses finally acquire the marks of use. The quiet they preserved disappears quickly. Nothing in these spaces explains the woman who owned them. The art she created over decades is dispersed next. Some works enter museum collections, others are sold privately. Curators study them for insight, searching for confession in composition or emotion in brushwork. They find discipline, restraint, repetition. The paintings do not narrate a life, they record control. There are no series showing change, no sudden stylistic breaks, no late-life urgency. The work remains consistent across time, mirroring the steady narrowing of her lived world. Viewers sense privacy, but not intimacy, distance, but not protest. The institutions that receive her fortune publish acknowledgments. Scholarships are endowed, wings are named, programs are expanded. Her name appears on plaques, often in understated form, honoring a benefactor described as private, generous, devoted to learning and care. Students pass her name without knowing her story. Patients benefit without knowing her life. The legacy functions efficiently, detached from the conditions that produced it. In this sense, her wealth succeeds after her death in a way it never did during her life. It creates impact. It moves outward. It connects strangers to resources. It fulfills a role wealth is expected to play, but it does so without her presence, as it always has. Public interest in Huguette Clark fades gradually. Articles grow less frequent. The mystery dulls into anecdote. She becomes a reference point for discussions of recluses, of inherited wealth, of isolation among the ultra-rich. Her name is invoked more than examined. The debates surrounding her final years, agency, influence, control, remain unresolved and slowly lose urgency. Courts have ruled. Documents have been honored. There is nothing left to contest legally. What remains is interpretive, and interpretation requires a voice she never provided. There is no recorded moment in which she reflects on her choices, no late-life interview, no personal writing that reframes her silence. The absence is total. This absence becomes the defining feature of her legacy. She left behind money, property, art, and institutions strengthened by her fortune. What she did not leave behind is testimony. There is no explanation for why withdrawal felt safer than participation, or why comfort replaced connection so completely. The irony is subtle but persistent. A woman whose wealth could have guaranteed visibility chose invisibility so thoroughly that even after death she remains unknowable. Her life does not lend itself to moral clarity. She was not forced into isolation by poverty or exclusion. She was not confined by overt coercion. She did not suffer a public fall that explains retreat. Her withdrawal unfolded within protection, compliance, and consent, all technically intact. That is what makes the story difficult. It suggests that disappearance does not always require violence or deprivation. It can occur slowly through accommodation, habit, and the quiet removal of friction. It can happen in rooms that are clean, safe, and well-funded. Huguette Clark was never abandoned. She was always surrounded, and yet no one truly shared her life. Those closest to her in her final decades knew her routines, her preferences, her medical needs. They did not know her history in any living sense. They did not grow with her. They did not challenge her. They did not require her presence beyond her signature. Wealth made this arrangement possible indefinitely. It removed deadlines. It removed pressure. It removed consequence. The early decisions she made to avoid attention, to let others decide, to withdraw rather than refuse, did not feel destructive at the time. Each one simplified her life. Each one reduced discomfort. None appeared irreversible. But together they formed a path that narrowed so gradually it never triggered alarm. By the time questions were asked, alternatives had lost meaning. The world outside her room was no longer something she could imagine herself re-entering. Not because she was barred from it, but because she had not practiced belonging to it in decades. Her story does not warn against wealth itself. It warns against insulation without engagement, against systems that protect so effectively they erase choice over time. In the end, Huguette Clark achieved what she seemed to want most: privacy without interruption, comfort without demand, silence without explanation. What she did not achieve was witness. No one was present to see her life unfold from the inside. No one shared it deeply enough to carry its meaning forward. The institutions that inherited her wealth cannot speak for her. The documents that governed her life cannot explain it. Her legacy functions, but it does not testify. And so she remains what she was in life, an absence carefully maintained, even after death. Not tragic in the obvious sense, not scandalous, not heroic, just a life that receded so completely into protection and routine that when it ended, there was nothing left to say, and no one left who could say it. That is what wealth could not buy her, and that is what it quietly took away. After the estate is settled and the final documents are archived, Huguette Clark's life leaves behind a peculiar stillness. There is no single image that defines her, no moment that anchors her story in the public imagination. What remains are fragments, preserved rooms, untouched objects, signed papers, institutional acknowledgments, all intact, all orderly, all incomplete. Her fortune continues to operate in the world long after she is gone. Buildings funded by her name remain open. Programs she supported continue quietly. Students, patients, and researchers benefit from resources she never saw in use. In this sense, her wealth succeeds where her life did not. It reaches outward. Yet nothing in these outcomes restores the missing center. There is no record of a turning point where she chose isolation explicitly. No written declaration explaining why retreat felt safer than presence. Her life does not collapse into a cautionary tale or resolve into a clear injustice. It resists judgment because it resists clarity. What can be traced instead is accumulation, small decisions repeated without challenge, silence accepted, then expected, protection layered until it replaced choice, structures built to help her that eventually became the only world she inhabited. She was never visibly deprived. She was rarely distressed. She was not abandoned. And yet, by the end, she existed almost entirely through systems designed to act on her behalf. Her absence was not dramatic. It was procedural. In the years since her death, Huguette Clark is often described as a mystery, but mysteries usually imply something hidden deliberately. Her life suggests something quieter. A person who learned early that withdrawal carried no penalty and later discovered that it carried no exit. Wealth ensured comfort, but it also ensured delay of confrontation, delay of reckoning, delay of change. Time passed without forcing her back into the world until the world became unreachable, not by force, but by distance. What is unsettling about her story is not that something was taken from her, but that so much was never demanded. No urgency pushed against her habits, no necessity required adaptation. The silence she chose early was allowed to deepen uninterrupted. In the end, Huguette Clark left behind money, property, institutions, and questions, but no voice to guide interpretation. Her life concludes without resolution, not because it was cut short, but because it was sustained indefinitely, without witness. She is remembered not for what she did, but for how completely she disappeared while everything around her remained intact. And that absence, preserved as carefully as her homes once were, is the only legacy that cannot be redistributed.